In the 1960s, Detroit was the undisputed center of American industry, but its most influential export was a sound. This city produced voices capable of crossing the deep racial divides of a country in turmoil. At the heart of it stood a converted house on West Grand Boulevard, known as Hitsville, USA. It was the headquarters of the Motown Empire, and a symbol of hope for young Black artists who had finally found a place to sing in their own homeland. The public responded with total devotion. The music was polished, joyful, and designed to make the world fall in love. To the outside world, Motown was the gold standard of success. But as the years passed, a pattern of tragic fates began to surface among those who moved beyond the label's orbit. Stories of early death, sudden illness, and isolation became frequent enough that people began to wonder if a curse had been cast over Detroit's most powerful musical export. Inside the Hitsville studios, engineers even whispered about phantom voices being picked up on microphones late at night. They claimed they could hear the faint, raspy echo of singers who had long since left the building. This video investigates the reality behind the Motown curse. We have to ask if these tragedies were the result of a supernatural shadow or the inevitable human cost of a corporate machine that demanded absolute, unwavering perfection. Tammy Terrell arrived at Motown when she was just 20 years old. Berry Gordy saw her innocence as a primary asset, molding her into a flawless face for the label's new era of crossover success. She was paired with Marvin Gaye to sell the public a specific romantic vision. Their chemistry on tracks like Your Precious Love was packaged into a product so convincing that audiences believed they were witnessing true soulmates. Her private life was the opposite of that manufactured image. She was in a relationship with David Ruffin of The Temptations, a man who left her with broken bones and physical scars. Tammy was often forced to hide the evidence of this violence under thick layers of stage makeup before the camera started rolling. On a night in October 1967, the physical toll became public. During a performance in Virginia, Tammy clutched her head, stumbled forward, and collapsed on stage into Marvin Gaye's arms. Doctors discovered a malignant brain tumor. Tammy was only 23. Over the next 3 years, she underwent 8 brain surgeries while her health steadily declined. While she was confined to a hospital bed, Motown continued to release her old recordings and use her smiling photos for new marketing campaigns. They were selling the idea that she was still healthy and still singing. Inside the label, the directive was clear: Motown can't have tragedy. The reality of her condition was treated as a liability that had to be kept from the public. Tammy Terrell died at the age of 24. Motown offered no official tribute or statement. Even her medical records were retrieved from the hospital and never seen again. Tammy's life shows how the label system operated. Once an artist's physical reality contradicted the brand of joy they were hired to project, they were simply moved out of the frame. 6 years after Tammy's death, Detroit saw the fall of Florence Ballard. As the founder of the Supremes, she provided the foundational, deep vocal grit that the group was originally built upon. The Supremes became a global phenomenon, appearing at the White House and selling millions of records. They were the premier symbol of Black women achieving the American dream. But as the group's fame grew, the label's strategy shifted. Florence was pushed to the background. Her vocals were lowered in the mix, and the spotlight was redirected entirely toward Diana Ross. By 1967, Florence was fired. She was given a small payout and sent away with no farewell and no explanation to the fans who had supported her from the beginning. She attempted a solo career, but the label's influence was extensive. She was effectively blacklisted from the radio stations that had once made her a star, and her new records were ignored by the press. By the 1970s, Florence was raising $3 in poverty on Buena Vista Street. She took janitorial jobs to pay the bills, a world away from the bright stage lights she once occupied. There were rumors of a diary she kept, containing details about fraudulent contracts and the label's inner workings. Her friends claimed she lived in fear that exposing these secrets would put her in physical danger. Florence Ballard died of cardiac arrest at the age of 32. In her purse, investigators found only a few coins and a single photograph of the 3 original Supremes holding hands. Corporate blacklisting and financial isolation dictated the final years of her life. She was erased from the very empire she helped build, because she attempted to exist outside of it. The aftermath of these deaths revealed the label's cold indifference. Marvin Gaye went into a 2-year silence, haunted by the loss of Tammy, while Florence Ballard's funeral was notable for the complete absence of any Motown executives. These tragedies resulted from a system viewing human beings strictly as financial assets. This commodification stripped away the individual. The pipeline was efficient: extract talent, suppress distress that might damage the brand, and discard artists the moment they became liabilities. The idea of a Motown curse served a functional purpose. It provided a supernatural explanation, which shielded the label's operational methods from closer scrutiny. The distance between the manufactured image on a record sleeve and the reality of the person behind it had become an unbridgeable chasm. One version of these artists was preserved in amber for the public. The other was left to struggle in the shadows. Listening to these classic records today requires an acknowledgement of the human cost involved. Behind every flawless vocal performance was a person whose health and safety were often secondary to the needs of the empire. To truly understand what happened in Detroit, we have to remember Tammy and Florence, not as tragic symbols, but as women who deserved better from the industry they helped define. Their lives were the real price of the sound that moved the world. In the 1960s, the American airwaves were dominated by a single, irresistible sound. Motown churned out melodies that made the country fall in love, cementing its status as an icon of joy, soul, and American musical excellence. The entire empire was run from a handful of residential houses, collectively known as Hitsville, USA. Behind these doors, the corporate machinery operated with strict discipline to maintain that joyful public facade. But away from the applause, the narrative takes a sharp turn. Several of the label's most defining artists ended up dead under circumstances that local police quietly closed and the music industry refused to question. A clear sequence of events preceded each death. The singers had either attempted to renegotiate their contracts, defected to rival labels, or threatened to publish details about how the company's money was actually handled. 3 distinct cases stand out from this era: Mary Wells, Paul Williams, and David Ruffin. Taken together, the timing of their deaths and the immediate disappearance of their personal records point away from tragic coincidence. Instead, they suggest a systematic effort to protect a financial empire by silencing its greatest liabilities. Mary Wells was the label's first true icon. She was the first Black woman in music history to gain nationwide embrace, generating massive initial value for the company. This turd shows the discrepancy at the center of her conflict with the label. Her 1964 hits generated hundreds of thousands of dollars, yet her actual royalty payout, based on a contract she signed at age 17 without a lawyer, was a tiny fraction of that revenue. When she asked to renegotiate, management refused. She signed with 20th Century Fox. DJs stopped playing her records, interviews were suddenly canceled, and doors across the entertainment industry slammed shut, suffocating her career in a coordinated, unspoken freeze-out. Decades later, battling throat cancer, Wells managed to gather donations to relocate to Arizona for therapy. Just days before the move, her condition inexplicably worsened. She lost her ability to breathe and died at age 49. She had kept a small box of her original contracts and payment slips, explicitly telling friends to look for it if she ever disappeared. In the days following her death, that box vanished from her apartment. Furthermore, a journalist revealed Wells had been drafting a memoir detailing her time at the label. 1 month after she passed, her book editor's office was burglarized. The thieves ignored other valuables and took only the files containing Wells's manuscript. Her trajectory establishes a baseline sequence of retaliation. The response began with total economic starvation and concluded with the physical erasure of the primary documents that could have proven her financial claims. Paul Williams served as the core ensemble architect for the Temptations. He wrote early songs, choreographed their precise stage routines, and provided the artistic discipline that made the group a national phenomenon. By the early 1970s, struggling with severe liver disease and sidelined from creative control, he hired a lawyer. He was in the final stages of preparing legal documents to sue the label for unpaid royalties owed to the founding members. Right before the filing date, on August 17, 1973, police found Williams dead in his parked car behind the 20 Grand Club in Detroit. The official ruling was suicide by handgun. The crime scene contradicted that ruling. The weapon had no fingerprints. The doors were locked outside, and the shell casing was located far away from where a self-inflicted shot would have ejected it. Immediately after the discovery of his body, the legal documents he had spent months assembling vanished. His attorney abruptly left town and severed all contact. Shortly after, the company quietly updated its internal policies to terminate old royalty disputes. While Mary Wells was stripped of her records posthumously, the timing of Williams's death indicates an escalation. The evidence suggests an intervention executed specifically to intercept illegal filing before it could enter the public record. David Ruffin was arguably the most famous lead voice of the Motown era. Arrogant, volatile, and eventually fired by management for being impossible to control, he spent years drifting through dark club circuits after his exit. By the 1980s, his grievances evolved into a tangible threat. He informed friends he was about to publish a memoir detailing the label's hidden operations, specifically focusing on untraced black money and alleged ties to the mafia. A week after making those claims, the 50-year-old singer was found dead on a street in Philadelphia. The medical examiner listed the cause as a cocaine overdose. The state of the scene defied the typical chaos of an overdose. He was parked inside a locked vehicle with the windows rolled exactly halfway down. His body was neatly arranged, and over $2,000 in cash remained untouched in his jacket pocket. Within days of his death, reporters attempting to follow up on his claims discovered that his notebooks, his physical manuscript, and his typewriter had all been removed from his living quarters. These three cases share an undeniable operational signature. Whether the medical examiner called it cancer, suicide, or an overdose, the outcome was identical. The moment the artist died, the physical evidence backing their financial claims, lawsuits, and manuscripts always vanished into the dark. Their funerals were solemn, tense affairs. Heavy police details monitored the crowds, and former bandmates stood by hastily built caskets without mentioning missing lawsuits or the stolen records. The message reverberated through the remaining roster. The sudden demise of their peers and the complete disappearance of their files successfully installed a culture of fear. From that point forward, the surviving artists kept their grievances to themselves. Today, these hit records are played as nostalgic soundtracks of a golden era. Yet listening to those bright, soaring melodies requires reconciling the music with the brutal administrative reality of how the creators were controlled. The timeless soul of these records was undeniably built by musical geniuses, but the longevity of the corporate empire that owned them was secured through a ruthless, permanent silence.
Just listen to these words from Eddie Kendricks. Keep in mind, this wasn't some outsider looking in. This was a guy at the absolute heart of the label. He called it a velvet prison. And honestly, that perfectly captures what we're looking at today. A glamorous, glittering exterior that masked a system you couldn't just escape.
Chapter 1, Eddie Kendricks' Stolen Freedom.
Now, Eddie Kendricks, as I'm sure you know, had this angelic falsetto, delivering hits that felt like pure joy. My Girl, Just My Imagination, absolute classics. But behind closed doors, a completely different story. He was asking dangerous questions. He wanted to know why the artists were just singing while others were getting filthy rich. When the label point blank refused to open the books, Eddie walked away in 1971. He thought he was finally stepping into freedom. Actually, it was the exact opposite.
Right after he left, his solo career just slowly vanished from the radio, which is a bizarre phenomenon that seemed to happen to basically anyone who walked away. Then, out of nowhere, the IRS seizes everything he owns. By the end of his life in 1992, while battling lung cancer, Eddie was incredibly paranoid. He was totally convinced he was being tailed by men in black cars just to make sure he never revealed what he knew.
And here is the absolutely crazy part. It wasn't just his life that ended. Literally every single piece of evidence he gathered, poof, evaporated. His unpublished expose memoir, gone. His legal tax files vanished right out of the court records. And immediately after he died, his apartment was broken into, and his personal safe was totally emptied before his best friend could even get there.
Which brings us to Chapter 2, Marvin Gaye's Haunted Rebellion.
Marvin Gaye's story is legendary, but when we look at it through this darker lens, it's terrifying.
Haunted by the 1970 death of his duet partner Tammy Terrell, Marvin retreated completely into seclusion. He was utterly convinced the label's curse was real. He carried that trauma everywhere, essentially becoming a man on the run from ghosts.
So he channeled all of this terror into What's Going On, and the sources describe this less as a standard album and more as a desperate public cry for help, a fight for his artistic life. Marvin was so terrified that the label wouldn't let him leave in one piece that he actually fled to Europe in 1981, hiding from hallucinations, completely suffocating under this immense fear that he was constantly being watched.
Following his tragic shooting death in 1984 by his own father, those who really knew the depth of his fear asked a seriously chilling question. Was a broken man simply driven to his breaking point? Or was he pushed? Was that immense psychological pressure part of a larger, much darker design?
Let's move to Chapter 3, Shorty Long's Fatal Silence.
If there's one story in this explainer that really brings these dark allegations to the surface, it's Shorty Long. And hey, if you haven't heard of him, well, that might be completely by design. Shorty was an uncredited genius, the very first Motown artist to write, arrange, and record his own songs. He paved the way for funk and soul. But he was repeatedly pushed aside, and when he publicly threatened to take his music to another label, he crossed a very, very dangerous line.
Let's look at the events of June 29, 1969. They are just riddled with impossibilities. Shorty departs for a late-night fishing trip. By morning, his small boat is found capsized. His body is recovered miles downstream with unexplained bruises on his head and shoulders. Keep in mind, Shorty couldn't swim, and he never fished at night. And when his family demanded an investigation, the entire official police file just vanished.
Even wilder, a test track he recorded just weeks prior disappeared from the archives forever. And the title of that missing track? Ain't No Justice. I mean, talk about a bitter irony, right? And to top it all off, not a single label rep attended his funeral, and local radio stations completely boycotted his music.
And that brings us to Chapter 4, The Motown Curse.
When we zoom out and look at the source material, a staggering number emerges. 8. 8 names, 8 deaths. Every single one of them an artist who had dared to walk out, dared to say no, and ultimately didn't live to tell the story. When you lay the data out like this, chronologically and thematically, the chilling similarities are just impossible to ignore. Every time someone was ready to speak out, publish a book, or demand an investigation, the physical evidence evaporated. Missing manuscripts, disappeared tax files, erased test tracks. I mean, it goes way beyond just a string about luck. It's a pattern.
Shorty Long famously said, "At Motown, my voice belongs to them, and so does my silence." It's haunting, right? It perfectly synthesizes what we're talking about today. It forces us to ask if this label was just a business or an inescapable pact that literally consumed the artist behind the music.
And you know, this legend continues to haunt Detroit to this very day. People actually claim that during heavy rains, the microphone in the empty, old Hitsville studio still picks up faint, reunited voices. The lore says you can hear Eddie's gentle falsetto or Tammy and Marvin singing together one last time, reunited in a place where the industry could never, ever reach them.
So based on everything we've unpacked here, we really have to ask ourselves, is the Motown curse a reality, or is it a cover-up? Were these artists simply victims of a tragic era, or were they systematically silenced to protect the glittering facade of that velvet prison?
I'll say this. The next time you hear upbeat classics like My Girl or What's Going On, take a moment to remember the immense darkness behind them. Because every time you tap your foot to those hits, you're hearing the sound of people who sacrificed everything, maybe even their lives, just to sing.
So, what do you think? Do you believe the curse is real, or is it all just a series of tragic coincidences? Leave a comment down below with your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe as we keep digging into the darkest corners of history in our next